Hey guys, welcome back. Another discussion today. Get into some beneficial information for you. If you're at the crossroads looking at tube amplification versus solid state, and give you a little bit of information, might help you out on your purchase. As you guys know, you can't always get the best information from the guy you're trying to buy from, because there's a conflict of interest sometimes. So, if you have a voice that's not profiting from the decision, sometimes you can get pretty solid info with a lot of clarity. If you're new to the concept of solid state and tube, it might be a little confusing for you. I know I was confused. I had a lot of guys that kind of were explained it to me, walked me through it, which was super helpful. And I think everyone kind of starts out on tube solid state simply because you'll generally find the solid state amps are a little bit more inexpensive, require a little bit less maintenance, and sound pretty rich and warm at lower volumes. That all suits parents and wives really well, because you can get a really nice warm tone out of a solid state amp if you're not taxing the amp at higher volumes. It's when you get out to a nightclub and you need some more oomph, so to speak, and you've got to jack the amp up. That's where solid state amps are going to really fail you. The long story short is solid state amps tend to be a little bit better for practice type regiments, home studios, that sort of thing, where you don't want excessive volume and you want to get a nice warm tone at a lower volume, either with your distortion or with through your clean sound. But again, the bellow really drops out of solid state as soon as you turn it up. You're going to lose your low end and your mid range frequencies, but low end especially. So that's where those amps start to sound really, really thin and crispy. The worst thing you can do is go into a nightclub and see the guitar player up there with a Strat playing through a solid state amp, because he's going to absolutely crush you. It's going to sizzle your ear. So let's talk about a little bit of a tube. Now, obviously, when you get into the tube amps, you're going to find the expense goes up. So you can get into a really, really nice solid state amp, probably in the $200 to $300 range, kind of a practice type amp. When you get into your tube amps, legit club amps that you could take out and play in a small club, they're going to start probably around the $600 or $700 range. If you buy something a little bit smaller than that, say $400 or $500, that's probably going to be your entry level tube amp. And that, as far as wattage goes, it might be a great name brand, but as far as the wattage goes, it's probably, you're going to be going into smaller clubs and medium-sized clubs, not really having what you need. So I would recommend starting when you're looking for your tube amps. You're going to start with that, $600 to $700 range, and you're going to end up with a fine amp that can play the small clubs and whatnot. Let's talk real quick about what you can expect with your tube amp. The tube amps are going to run generally on your preamp section, which is going to be a smaller tube, like a 12AX7, and that's what generates your preamp. And then it has the power amp side, and those are going to be your bigger tubes. So, I have, for instance, a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe, and that has, let me refresh my own memory here. We have 2 power tubes, 6L6s, and we have 2 12AX7s. So this amp runs on four tubes, 2 big ones, 2 small ones. They will require some maintenance, so tubes will burn out. So the life of the tube really varies. It depends on how much you're playing it. It depends on the volume you're playing your amp with. Now, I will tell you this. I had this Fender Deluxe the first year they came out, the Hot Rod Deluxe, which is somewhere in the late 90s, I think, mid to late 90s. And I got the 50 watt version. And I had tubes in that thing for probably 12 years and never changed them. And I finally got to the point where I was getting some work done, and I went to my repair guy, and I just threw my tube amp in the car, and I thought, well, you know, I may as well have him retube this too because it's been a while. I didn't really have any issues with the with the amp. I just thought, I knew it had been a while. I knew that I was still playing on the original tubes that came in the amp, and I gigged pretty hard with that amp, so I was just like, well, you know, on a lark, I just kind of threw it in the back of the Jeep to take it up to my guy, and I figured I'll let him, you know, just retube this. So, of course, you know, I dropped the stuff off, and, you know, a day or two later, he called me up, Randy called me up and said, Wayne, what's up with this Fender Hot Rod Deluxe that you brought in? And I said, yeah, I said, that one, you know, I said, he said, were you having issues with it? I said, no. He said, oh, he said, I said, but it's been 12 years since, you know, I bought it like 12 years ago, and, you know, it's the original tubes. And he said, well, he said, you know, I put them on the tester, whatever those guys do, you know. He put the tubes on the tester, and he said, they're reading fine. He said, are you sure you want to change these out? And I said, well, no, I wasn't having any problems with it. Then he said, well, then I'd leave it be, you know. So, you know, you can get, you know, they can be really fluky. You know, it just really kind of depends on the amplifier and the conditions you're running it in. There's a lot of variables that go into play, but in that case, honest to God, it's like at least 10 years, probably closer to 12. And I didn't change out the tubes in that amp. And then finally, a couple years later, I think one of them did go out, and then I ended up having it retubed. But I got something like 14 years out of that set of tubes. And so don't always assume, hey, if I buy a tube amp, I'm going to have to switch out the tubes. You know, they say every 3 to 5 years, depending on how much you're playing it. But that's not always the case. But you will have more maintenance with the tube amplifier, you know, and, you know, they can be a little bit more, you know, solid state amps, you know, I've had solid state amps, you just turn them on and they just keep coming on. So there's not a whole lot that can go wrong with a solid state amp. You know, tube amps are a little bit more temperamental. You know, so you do have that, but you know, you retube an amp and have it biased by your local guy. You know, you're looking at a couple $100, maybe $200-300, something like that. For my amplifier, it's, you know, and a lot of the newer amps are self-biasing, so that means they're telling you, hey, look, just go to the guitar store, get your tubes, get the tubes you need, pull them out, and push them back in. I just have mine biased by a guy. You know, I don't kind of fiddle with it. You could certainly do it, and because, you know, they advertise the amps now as being self-biasing, so you can take those tubes out. The old ones that are giving you fits are not working as well anymore. Your amp just doesn't sound as good anymore. You just pull them out the back and plug in the new ones, you know. And, you know, they claim on a lot of the newer amps that they bias themselves. But, you know, if you have a guy that you trust and a repair guy that, you know, looks at your gear, your guitar guy, your amp guy, I always just take it to him and just say, hey, look, clean it out, and what he does is he cleans the connectors and makes sure the solder points are all good and everything like that. And then I just let him, him put the tubes on the meter and get it straightened out that way, because he charges $40 or $50 to do that. So I just like to have know that someone, hey, did it, and it was not just me monkeying around in the back of the amp and not really knowing 100% what I'm doing. So the thing with the tube amps is, if you try to play them at home, a lot of times you have to turn it up, and even when you turn it up to 1 or 2, it's just skull busting loud. So to get the warmth that you want out of it, you generally have to have it probably a little bit higher, have the amplifier set a little bit hotter than you really want it for your apartment or your house, if you have wives and kids and all that kind of stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. When I run my tube amp at home, I actually play it through, I play a preamp through it. So I'm actually playing a solid state pedal into my tube amp, because I still want to get some decent warmth, but I can't turn it up in my neighborhood to the level I need to get it to have the distortion really that's built into the amp really humming. So that's kind of the play between tube and solid state, and it's a good idea to have both. Really get yourself a nice solid state amp that you like, something you can throw in your practice room, and then you have your tube amp for your gigs, or when you get together with people in the garage and you need something that has a little bit more oomph. There's a lot of different features with tube amplifiers. Now that you have rectifier switches, and you can change the circuitry on the amp. What that does is, amps run A circuitry, and you can run them A-B circuitry, and I think there's a B circuitry. Check me on that. I'm not positive that it's that there's 3 of them and that's what they're called. But I know A and A-B, what you do is you can change the circuitry with a switch on the amp, and what that does is it kind of carburetes the amp to the point of it won't let it run too hot, and so you'll get more life out of your tubes. So you can play around with that, and those amps are usually pretty expensive. I think Mesa Boogie has a couple models where you can do that. So you can actually change the circuitry and decide if you want the amp to run really, really hot or really, really cooler. And having that switch will give you a little bit more life out of your tubes, give you a little bit more versatility. But again, that feature comes with generally your really, really boutique shop amplifiers. I have a couple really nice Fender tube amps, and they don't offer that feature, but you will see that. So, tube versus solid state. I hope that helped you out. I won't get into brands, because, some people like chocolate ice cream, some people like vanilla. There are a lot of great brands out there. I mean, the Fender stuff, I've had a lot of success with the Hot Rod Deluxe. It's just a really good all-around versatile, sounds really good. It sounds good clean. It sounds good with the distortion. And, when you're playing, rock tunes and you're playing ballads, and, you need clean tone, obviously having an amp that can give you that versatility is pretty important. So, you shop around, but generally for a small bar, medium-sized club, you're going to be looking at whether you go with PV, whether you go with Fender, whether you go with Marshall. You're probably starting a tube amp in that $600 or $700 range to get you the wattage you need to cover the room. Again, thanks for stopping by, hanging out. www.theguitar-shop.com. Email theguitarshopstudios@gmail.com. Good luck out there, guys.